It is Thursday, July 6th, 2023, and you're watching the MMA Eco Live podcast. I'm your host, Chris Presnell, owner of MMA Ecosystem, also manage some fighters, work for Tapology, worked lots of different media outlets in my career history. But today, the hour is ours, and I'm excited to talk about some MMA. Took the week off last week, had family in town for literally the whole week. Spent some time on the Oregon coast, spent some time in the city of Portland, and it was a good old time. But happy to be back. We've got a really busy weekend. Not so much in the quantity of events, but more in the scale of a couple events, mainly talking about UFC, talking about JCK, which I admit is a smaller, more niche audience. But if you know the fighters, you know it's a big card. Also got some Pancrase going on, got a live One Pride MMA show. So enough good things to talk about and to be excited about. So let's get into that together. You can drop your comments in the comment box and I will get to those later in the show. Go for about 30 minutes or so, and then I'll get to your questions. Please keep it kind, keep it civil. And here we go. So first up, I want to hit on AFC. So AFC is Korean Promotion Angels Fighting Championship. They've got a card on this, I believe it's this Saturday morning. Let me see, where are they even having this show? They've been bouncing back between Vietnam and Korea, but looks like this card is in Sacheon, South Korea, and it's going to be airing on their YouTube channel for free, I believe. That's the AFC YouTube channel. That is going to be starting at 3:15 a.m. Pacific or 6:15 a.m. Eastern time. At least that's when I looked today, the video was scheduled to go live. So that card, usually AFC will have a couple pretty good prospects coming out of Korea. They're starting to kind of get into Vietnam a little bit in terms of holding shows there, signing a couple Vietnamese fighters. So that's pretty interesting. But this show is a Korean show and not a whole lot going on that I necessarily is like hitting my radar. Most of the fighters on this card are 1-2 fights deep into their career, so or on some losing streaks. There's a couple. Park Yo-jin just won he's on the card. He won the main event of the first Ring FC event, so he might be one to watch. Otherwise, I'll go through it and I'll post the results on my social media. Another event going on this weekend is One Pride MMA 70. So One Pride MMA, the main Indonesian fight promotion, gave us guys like Jeka Sargi and all the great fighters that came up with losses this year in Road UFC. But yeah, so they've got their 70th show this Saturday live from Jakarta. Of course, they only air and even announce the matchups that are on the main card. Those fights will be shown live, usually title fights, number one contender fights, and then the rest of the mini prelims will be aired over the next couple weeks. So on Saturday, they've got an atomweight title. And no, that's not a women's atomweight title. That is the men's atomweight title. I feel like there's a case for these two fighters to be the best two atomweights in the world for what it's worth. Not saying I'm any kind of expert on men's atomweight, but both guys have really good records and it's for a belt. So it very well could be. Not to say there's a lot of competition, but Faisal Lassa is defending his atomweight title with One Pride against Ade Pramana. So these guys, I believe Lassa just won the belt in his last fight. So this is his first title defense. Both guys kind of have similar records, 8-1, 8-2, 7-1, kind of records around that. I can't remember the records off the top of my head, but the other two fights, Sopriandi Niabajo versus Ronald Siahan, not Ronald Siahan, who fought in Road UFC, but Ronald Siahan. Also, gosh, how do you pronounce it? Tridifa Christoforis versus Aljulde Hamro Simbolin. So those are both contender fights, as they're calling them. Otherwise, we'll see what they're able to come up with in terms of the prelims. it's a mystery to me. It's a mystery to you. So we'll see where that kind of see the fights over the next couple weeks for that. But in the meantime, catch some men's atomweight action going on. Top of the line in terms of men's atomweight around the world. So catch that Faisal Lassa versus Ade Pramana. We've also got, I guess it's time, for UFC 290. Now, there's a gajillion storylines with this card, and a lot of those are beyond the scope of like at least me talking about it in my opening kind of overview of the schedule for Asian MMA. But we do have Tatsuro Taira, the main Asian fighter on UFC 290. Was supposed to compete on June 24th, 2 weeks ago, but his opponent backed out, and fortunately the UFC were able to book him in a 130-pound catchweight fight 2 weeks later here on an even bigger card in Las Vegas against Edgar Chairez. So they have signed Chairez. I'm going to go with Chairez for now. Sorry if I'm wrong. They signed Chairez from the Contender Series. He was supposed to compete on Dana White's Contender Series later this year, but they have signed him. They've been doing that a lot lately. You know, they signed like Josh Van from Contender Series. They signed Val Woodburn to fight Bo Nickel this weekend as well. So it's almost like Contender Series is becoming like this perpetual backup system for the UFC, which makes I think it's a good system because these guys are already preparing for fights. They're already kind of in the UFC system. So a lot of these fighters are getting these short notice call ups, and I bet we'll probably see more of it as time goes on. But we've got Edgar Chairez, who is a Contender Series alum as well. He's going to be fighting Tatsuro Taira. I don't know a whole lot about Chairez's game, but from what I've seen, I feel like this should be a pretty solid victory for Tatsuro Taira. It doesn't seem like it's anything he hasn't seen before. He's fought some pretty good guys at flyweight already, and I would think this will probably be another win for him. But you know, Chairez, from what I know, he's a competent grappler from what I can see. So this could be a good stand-up fight. Maybe we'll get to see even more of Tatsuro Taira's stand-up. That could be cool. So looking forward to that fight. Of course, looking forward to the whole card. I am going with a buddy on the rooftop of his apartment where there's a big TV and getting some friends together to watch the UFC 290 pay-per-view. So that should be a lot of fun. First, I'll probably be in the corner somewhere live tweeting, or is it live threading now? Live posting. We're going to go with live posting until we have a new word for this. I don't even know. I don't know what we call this now. But yeah, we're giving plenty of coverage on my Instagram page. I posted a video earlier this week, kind of looking at International Fight Week as a whole, the top 5, in my opinion, top 5 best events from International Fight Week past. So you can check that out after this podcast. But yeah, excited for UFC 290. I think this is interesting, guys. This is interesting. So I was looking at the last 10 cards or so. I would say since about 2015, 2016, I think 2016, UFC 200, there's been like a serious curse with International Fight Week cards. I've got a block of wood right here, so I'm knocking on it. But every single International Fight Week card, there's been something major that has happened to change the card. Everywhere from John Jones and the whole UFC 200 debacle to Conor McGregor and Chad Mendes. Well, of course, that was supposed to be McGregor versus Aldo. That fell out 2 weeks before the fight. Max Holloway fighting Frankie Edgar fell out, I think, the week of the fight for that event. And then a lot of other fights were just kind of stinkers. It's not like highly entertaining main events. Jones versus Santos, Adesanya versus Cannonier. Not necessarily like stinkers on paper, you might think, but they just kind of ended up as a little bit duds. Then you have like McGregor versus Dustin Poirier 3 that ended in the leg break. So hopefully, like, this card has stayed really well intact. The biggest loss that we've had is Tresean Gore being injured. Or excuse me, the biggest loss we've had was Sean Brady having to bow out of his fight against Jack Della Maddalena. But if that's the biggest loss that we suffer, we're doing pretty good considering that fight is on the prelims. So uh, I even the Bo Nickel Val Woodburn fight, I essentially see that the exact same way. Like I think Val Woodburn is a good prospect. Bo Nickel is still just a few fights into his career, and so I think really anybody you throw at him who's like UFC level or even just a bit below is just right for him right now. So excited for that fight. And the two main events, the co-main and main, I think should be pretty entertaining. You don't look at those fights and imagine that they're going to suck. So hopefully no one gets injured last minute. Hopefully no weigh-in debacles, when no illnesses. We just want to see some really good fights, top to bottom. Hopefully this event delivers. So I think it will. I think we're going to get a lot of great finishes or great fights. So UFC 290, keep it locked to MMA ecosystem, and I'll be giving you the goods. But yeah, other than that, so I realized I forgot to put up my UFC 290 banners. I was getting a little too excited here. I'll touch on Pancrase in a second, but the other main thing that I'm really excited for this weekend, guys, is the JCK Finals. And I know that, like, especially on YouTube, there's probably not a whole lot of like diehard Chinese MMA fans. But again, hear me out, guys. These really are like the best guys, like top to bottom. It's not even just the championship fights on this card, but all the prelims are guys that like just missed the finals. That are, I think all these guys are semifinalists, but they matched all these guys up that just barely missed the finals. There's a lot of really, really good prospects, some really young guys, some guys that just suffered their first loss or their first loss in a long time. I want to bring up this card because I want to highlight some things, because I don't know how many people you can get on a podcast with that could walk you through a card as good as this from China and tell you who people are. So I'm going to tell you who some people are here. And of course, if you've watched my stuff for a while, you know who some of these guys are. But all right, there we go. So here we go with JCK, the finals of their 2022-2023 season. So there were some issues with the lightweight and welterweight bracket. They have 5 brackets, flyweight to welterweight. So we're getting the second half of semifinals from lightweight and welterweight, which should be tremendous fights. But look at this main event, guys. Shang Zhifa, if you watch Contender Series, you know who he is. The guy has not lost since he was on the Contender Series, which he lost a split decision. He's getting pretty old by now. I think he's 36 years old, but he's won 6 straight, and he's fighting a guy that has actually more experience than him in Buhuo Yoga. Buhuo Yoga has really risen to the occasion. He was kind of a guy that would like win one, lose one, win one, lose one. That's why his record is fairly even. But he's hit his prime, and I would say he's reached a level above. He's really isolated his weapons and figured out like what his good weapons are. He's got a great overhand right. He's got a really nasty guillotine, and he is now like a head coach at a gym in Chongqing, China called E-Fight. And you're seeing a lot of really good E-fighters coming up through the ranks in China. Some later on this card, but Buhuo Yoga is connected to most of those fighters as their coach. So he has reached kind of a new level. He's won, I think, 5 or 6 of his last 7. So he's doing pretty well for himself. I think he's going to be a really tough test for Shang Zhifa. Probably will lean Shang. It's hard to pick against him and his wrestling and grappling, but I think it'll be a good fight. Buhuo Yoga is a very good fighter, and I'm looking forward to it. They've never fought each other before. Also in the co-main, we've got Duli La, who is a really, really talented ethnic Mongolian wrestler. And he's going up against this guy, Wang Xiaoshang, who I've counted out in every single fight, but he keeps winning, and he's been fighting some pretty good guys. So this should be an interesting fight. Again, I'll probably lean Duli La here, but Dulila has been a guy that's trained at the UFC Shanghai PI, and he's always been like just out of reach of these really career defining moments. He always makes it really far in the JCK season, usually falls short in like the finals or semifinals. So now he is in the finals again, and I feel like this is his best chance at winning the big prize. Of course, that prize is 1 million Chinese RMB, which comes out to about 220,000 USD, which is unheard of, honestly, for like a regional promotion that's still kind of at the beginning. I don't know where they're getting all this money from, but it's a lot of cash, that's for sure. All the winners of these tournaments get this huge pile of cash. So pretty could be career changing moments for them if they win this. So Dulila, expecting him to take this, but Wang Xiaoshang has looked pretty good and really surprising performances out of him. Then this one should be a banger. You've got Wang Jijung fighting Hubulan Tuarshamdeka. Wang Jijung is a great Muay Thai striker, and then Hubulan is a good wrestler, and his boxing is coming along. So we've got a couple guys on this card training out of China Top Team. Hubulan is a longtime China Top Team guy. He's on a tear right now. He's been another guy that's kind of had like a very unimpressive record for much of his career, and then he's just hit another gear as well. So happy to see that, happy for him, and I think this should be a great fight against Wang Jijung. Wang was a finalist last year in JCK's featherweight tournament, so great fight here. The fight that I'm most looking forward to, two guys that could probably be in the UFC by the end of this year. Ali Mulatabieka versus Aziz Kadirov. Aziz, we've got the Chinese flag on him at Tapology, but he is Tajik. I'm not really sure his story of if he is only a Tajik citizen. I know he's another China Top Team guy, but he's at the UFC PI as well, as is Ali Mulatabieka. So two really good guys. I know Ali has been like right at the cusp at being in the UFC. They wanted to get Aziz into Road to UFC this year, but I think he was still kind of committed to the JCK season. So the winner of this fight, or at least the winner of the lightweight season, I would think will probably fight in the UFC maybe this year, potentially even if the UFC makes a visit to China in December. So really, really looking forward to this fight. Two guys that are absolute killers on a tear, probably like the highest level of potential of any fight on this card. That is the lightweight semifinals. The welterweight semifinals, Wang Qi versus Ding Meng. Two guys that are really experienced, throw heavy hands. This should be a really great fight as well. Also got this wacky fight of Tung Li Ge versus Aping Shala, and probably going to be a win for Tung Li Ge, but Aping Shala is a promising prospect for the future, definitely. But he's really young and pretty green right now, but he's got some good skill. Another really good fight of prospects here. We've got Shamuhar Aidalibieka versus Hailai Arka. Hailai Arka is one of the E fighters under Buho Yoga's command, and he just suffered his first loss and exited the flyweight tournament. And as did Shamuhar, also booted out of the flyweight tournament with a loss. So these two guys are two really good prospects out of China. Other than that, I think the rest of these fights should be good. But those are like the top prospects, I would say, from this JCK card. So really looking forward to that. I believe that is mostly it. We've got a Pancrase doubleheader this Sunday. Pancrase 335 and 336 live from Tokyo. And they're okay cards. I would say the guys that I'm watching for are Naoki Hirata. He is Itsuki Hirata's younger brother. So he's been training a little bit at Longo Weidman MMA. So he's going back over. He just won his Pancrase debut. So he was in CFFC actually last year in the American Northeast, but he lost that fight, and now he's fighting back in Japan. So he can get a couple wins under his belt. I would wonder if he's going to get picked up by a big promotion. So watch for him, Naoki Hirata. We've also got Toki Matsui, who is a 5-0 flyweight. He was 23 years old. So I just put out a video a couple weeks ago about some top like Japanese killers under the age of 25. and I totally missed this guy, or maybe he would have been just outside my top 10 or top 11. But yeah, so I've got my eye on him. He's beaten some pretty experienced guys. Otherwise, I don't know a whole lot about him. But those are the two names I'm probably going to be watching for out of Pancrase. But other than that, that is pretty much what we got this weekend in Asian MMA. So, y'all's favorite part of the show. Let's get to your questions, shall we? Kendra, it's always good to hear from you. Hi, Chris. Wanted to know more about Road to UFC. Can they still sign losing fighters to the UFC? The last event showed some great fighters and with a lot of potential, like Top Noi and Ibu Gala. Well, they can do whatever they want, but usually they don't sign the losers unless they make it to the finals. So if Ibu Gala, he's actually already got a fight booked. He's going to be fighting for Dragon FC July 22nd. That's a Chinese promotion. He's fighting a Japanese guy. I just added the fight to Tapology yesterday or the day before, so you can check that out. But usually they're not going to sign fighters from the first round if they lose. Maybe not even the semifinals. The losing fighters that they signed last year from the whole season were Toshiomi Kazama and Jeka Saragi. So, right, they didn't sign the flyweight guy or the ban or whoever the featherweight guy was. Yeah, they didn't sign Ejaw. That's right. But so they're probably not going to. Now, that doesn't mean they don't have their eye on guys like Ibu Gala and Top Noi. They can get a couple more wins and be right back in the mix. Especially like if Ibu Gala can fight like 2 to 3 more times in the next couple months and get some good wins, then the UFC could consider him to put on like a China card later this year or next year. So yeah, especially like a short notice. You remember like you may not remember this, but Song Yadong was like a last minute replacement for the UFC Shanghai card. It was supposed to be, I think, Liu Pingyuan, who also was signed to the UFC, but he got injured and the UFC signed Song Yadong to fight Bharat Kandari, first Indian fighter in the UFC. And it was a smash hit. It was great. So they could definitely sign Ibu Gala if, especially for like a short notice fight. And then Top Noi, I think he's still right up there, but because he lost the fight by split decision was the thing, and it was a non-tournament fight. So I know that if he were to win that fight, the UFC would have definitely signed Top Noi. But I bet Top Noi will get another fight or two, maybe in Japan, and then he'll be right back into the mix. And I'm sure the UFC would love to have him, even if they're not confident he's going to make like a title run. He's always entertaining. So I would, yeah. Top Noi is my vote for sure. Isn't AFC and most Korean shows corrupt? I've heard like I haven't heard rumors about AFC, but I know there's corruption in the Korean MMA scene, but I don't know if I can say specifically who. Also, some of like the CEOs of these Korean promotions have turned over in the last couple of years. So I don't know if I should. I don't know if I can confidently say which ones are corrupt or if there even is still a lot of corruption. Korean MMA is changing really rapidly, so hopefully they're flushing out some of those bad actors. But I don't have anything bad in my mind. I mean, I'm being honest. I don't have anything bad to say about AFC. So. Joseph, man, I'm not gonna answer those questions. You know how I feel about Asian MMA. Josh Van looked really good against Jumagulov. What matchup do you think would be fun for him? Like Sumo Darji or maybe UFC pay defender Matt Schnell? I would say give Josh Van another pretty low ranked fighter. He's still really young in his career, and give him like Sumo Darji is ranked as is Matt Schnell. So I would say give him a couple, like 2 or 3 more unranked fighters. And oh man, he did look really, really good. He looked really good against Jumagulov. Let's see. Who could we put? You could put him against someone like Clayton Rodriguez. That'd be fun. Victor Altamirano. That'd be a great fight. Alessandro Costa. All great fights. Those would be really good for him just to fight some more experienced guys. Do you like the Contender Series fighter situation? Jack Della Maddalena is generally one of the most talented prospects in MMA, but is only being paid 10 and 10. Yeah, do I like the situation? I think it is. I think it's time. I mean, yeah, making 10 and 10 is more than you're going to make for most promotions around the world. Like that's still better than what you're going to make. That's way better than you're going to make at one championship starting out. That's better than you're going to make at Bellator starting out. Most likely that's going to be better than PFL, but if the fighters' contracts, I would say like I would be okay with it if those 10 and 10 contracts were like a 2-fight deal, a 1 or 2 fight deal. That's not to say I don't think that they're due for a pay raise. I think everyone who like signs with the UFC should be making double that, at least 20 and 20. But they're new to the UFC. They're kind of getting their legs wet. The UFC is kind of testing out what they can do. So I would say give them like a 2 or 3 fight deal, and then re-up, and then you can negotiate for much higher pay. But yeah, I'm not sure how long, if it's like the same for everybody. Jack Della like definitely. I mean, that guy should be making like 80 and 80 per fight at least. So it is weird how you'll have these fighters just kind of become breakout stars, and then they're like still on this Contender Series contract. So it is very weird. Thoughts on the Octagon 46 weird floor design? Weird, yeah. You all seen that? Octagon is a fun show, but like they go a little too intense for me with their like design of their canvases and posters, their promotion. Their production is a little bit too intense for me. I'm trying to find my phone so I can show you guys. I posted this photo of the. See if this looks terrible or not, but just take a look at this this photo. This is the poster for the main event. Look at the flags flying around everywhere, and that's just a little bit too much. The text is hard to read. It took me a while to even realize that there was a 47 behind there. So Octagon MMA, those guys are crazy. They go hard with the visuals. So it is kind of funny. Are you a fan of Sean Strickland and Jake Shields? I love them because of their views on freedom, and as American, you should too. I don't get the hate they get. People have lots of different opinions. I wouldn't say I'm a fan per se. There's not a lot of fighters that I would count myself as a fan. Interested? Yeah. There's not a lot of fighters that I would say I'm a fan of because of their views. It's more their fighting style. Sometimes Sean Strickland can say some pretty insensitive, like really degrading things about women, which I don't love. So I think that he needs to be called out for that a little bit more. So it was hilarious. So someone was it the post-fight press conference this last weekend where Sean Strickland was talking about how women need to like get out of the workforce and like all these like terrible things about women, and then it was like quiet for a second, and a reporter was like, have you ever considered going to therapy? Like, it was just, I thought it was hilarious. Yeah. Let's see. Mention Buho Yoga isolating his weapons and building around it. Is that a good way to build other fighters by isolating their best weapons? Or should all MMA fighters look to be well-rounded? You should look, the best case scenario is that you're able to hide your best weapons inside a well-rounded game. Every fighter needs to know how to wrestle. everyone needs to know how to strike, how to deal with orthodox, with southpaw fighters. But if you're able, because if you only have three really good weapons, you can't just fire those weapons over and over and over again, unless you're Ronda Rousey in 2015. But if you've got a well-rounded game and you know how to set those weapons up, Buho Yoga has a really good right hand, but you can't just throw one punch over and over and over again. You have to set it up with leg kicks, with different kinds of movement, with jabs, things like that. So I think if you're able to hide your best weapons, then that's your best bet. If you're able to react and hit that takedown from different angles, I think that's another thing as well. So because like uh, there's a lot of fighters that don't really have like one thing that stands out, but they have a really good. It's like once you get them into their rhythm and their flow, they're able to take over. So Buho Yoga, I think he's finally learning to do that. The Nonito Donaire of riding with Flair, the Mei Yamaguchi of Stanley Tucci, and the Corey Sanhagen of jumping off the Cheeto bandwagon. Why is there a power slap event during the UFC weigh-in show? I don't get why they're using the UFC to push it. It's fine to like slap at you. I'm with you. I'm as pissed as you are that they're throwing another brand in the middle of UFC. Um, they are convinced that there will be a significant portion of the UFC fan base that will gravitate towards power slap, and they could be right, but it's really annoying. Everyone's like, if you don't like it, don't watch it. Well, I don't really have a choice when they just like, Lord, please do not put a power slap competition in the middle of the UFC event. I will be very upset if that happens. Let's see. Question about having WUFC as a separate promotion. No, I don't I don't see it. I honestly really like that women and men compete on the same platform. I really like that a lot. I've watched enough WMMA, which is just MMA. I mean, MMA, WMMA, but I come from Kansas City, Missouri, so I went to a lot of these Invicta shows, and I'm serious, you guys. Like some of these fights are the most entertaining fights that I have ever seen. And you think about like Zhang Wei Li versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk, and uh, Arena Aldana versus Lucy Pudilova. Some of these just all time great fights, guys. And I I would I never want to envision a day where these two are separate. I honestly hate that idea. The UFC is such a better promotion with women being a part of it, and I don't ever want to go back. And I hope that eventually we add the women's atomweight division. That would be really exciting. Some great fights in there. If you guys haven't seen Michelle Watterson versus Jessica Penne in Invicta, that is an absolute war. Great fight. The last fight, or one of the last fights before both of those made the jump to the UFC. So yeah, UFC is absolutely better with women, and creating two different tiers like that, I think that would mess up a lot of things. And I'm happy to have women in the UFC. So let's see. How old is the Pancrase promotion? It's from like the 80s, right? Heard different stories from different people. Some say it's over 50 years old. Some say it's the oldest promotion. What's your knowledge on the history? That's a great question. That sounds like a great YouTube video someday. Let me just see what Wikipedia says here about Pancrase, because from my knowledge, it's been around since like the 80s. It says, let's see, history. In 1993, Masakatsu Funaki, Minoru Suzuki, Ken Shamrock, Takaku Fuke, and others from the shoot style Fujiwara Gumi wrestling promotion left the company due to mentor and promoter Yoshiaki Fujiwara's decision to cooperate with the likes of Universal Lucha Libre and WING in favoring showmanship over in-ring work. In May 16th, 1993, they established World Pancrase Create Incorporated. So this says 1993, but man, I thought that they've been around since the 80s, because that's what I had heard too, is they were kind of like the actual first MMA promotion. But 50 years I haven't heard, so I'll have to look into that. That's a great question. For UFC Singapore, does UFC know that Korean Zombie is not Singaporean? Why don't they have actual Singaporean talent for that card? I would say because if I'm just honest, there isn't a lot of high shelf Singaporean talent. If you know of any that could sit on like a UFC main card, let me know. But there's a couple Singaporean fighters that are in one championship, right? There's like Tiffany Teo, the Lee family, which looks like Christian Lee is the only one currently fighting in one championship. Of course, they're American with Singaporean ethnicity or Singaporean roots, but yeah, they've got. And then there's a couple others. I think Adrian Peng is also Singaporean. Not sure if he's still with the promotion, but they tried to bring Sim Kai Shong through Road to UFC. Of course, he suffered a pretty nasty knockout. But I would, as I've gone through like the Singaporean fighters in Tapology, just seeing like who's out there, there's not a lot of like immediately UFC ready talent that isn't signed with one championship. I could be wrong. If you know of someone, let me know. But there's some good gyms. There's more and more good gyms. Of course, they've got Evolve MMA. They've got Matrix MMA. Uh, Pineapple, is it Pineapple MMA? Just started there too. So there's some new gyms coming up, and I expect we're going to start seeing more and more fighters, especially since it's like such an international hub. I don't know if it'll ever be on par with like Thailand and Phuket, Thailand, in terms of being like an international destination in Asia for for MMA gyms, but they're adding a lot more in the last year or two. UFC gym closed in Singapore, which was kind of a shit show. That closed recently, but yeah, keep an eye out. I'll definitely be watching Singapore to see if any Singaporean talent. I'd love it if they could find just like one fighter to put on that card. So that'd be cool. What is your opinion on the UFC PI idea in general? It's a good hub for most fighters to do camps, but I heard it doesn't structure the camps for them since Santino DeFranco, source of Santino DeFranco Discord. Well, yeah, and the reason they don't structure, it's a little bit different in China, but like they're not, because things get a little bit messy when the promoter is basically training the fighters. When the promoter has a massive stake and a lot of control over a fighter's training, then things get a little bit messy. You start to go down a couple more dominoes from that. Then you start to get kind of into like a James Krause situation with betting, and things get a little bit messy. So that's why the UFC PI coaches are not allowed to coach fighters in fights, in UFC fights. They did coach some fighters in Dana White's Contender Series a couple years ago, but those coaches like Dean Amasinger, you'll never see them coaching a fighter in like an MMA fight. It's meant for like kind of just a temporary place for the fighter to train. And they can renew that year over year. At least that's how it works in the UFC PI in Shanghai. But yeah, I think their goal is to try and keep fighters healthy, to give a space for fighters to train that they may not have at home, or just access to better equipment, bigger spaces, more isolated space to train. So I think that is really good. We've got the UFC PI in Mexico opening up later this year, so I'm really excited to see that. Interested to see what kind of coaches they bring on there. I heard that they're going to open like two PIs in Mexico, maybe. So that'd be cool. Maybe they could go to like Monterrey or Guadalajara, or even Tijuana would be great too. It's great to have a PI in the country, but when the PI, I mean, it's a long ways to travel if you live in a big country. I mean, you could train in the northeast of the U.S. and the PIs in the American Southwest. So I wonder if we'll even get like another PI in the US on the East Coast someday. Just like a smaller one where it's not like a UFC office necessary or a UFC headquarters, but more of just like a gym space and physical therapy, things like that. So yeah, and hopefully we get one in Nigeria someday. Hopefully we get one in Abu Dhabi. I think it's a really good resource for fighters. I've really seen that and just like feedback from fighters in China. They love the PI over there. So I think it's a good resource. Robbie Lawler is retiring this weekend. Man, are you sad for him? He's had a great career and reinvented himself in the second stint in the UFC. Yeah, I posted on Instagram yesterday, kind of recapping his career. And Robbie Lawler was in the UFC long before I was even a UFC fan in 2007. So many phases of this guy's career. There was like UFC stint one, then there was Elite XC, then there was Strike Force, which were not like, I mean, he lost a lot of fights in Strike Force, right? He had a lot of tough matchups fighting guys like Jake Shields and but yeah, it was tough for him in Strike Force and then kind of like mixed anticipation for him coming back to the UFC, but then he goes on this huge tear and it kind of coincided with when he left the Militich gym. It was more like the Militich gym closed, but yeah, then he started kind of traveling around for his training. He's at Kill Cliff FC now, but what a like long and historic career for Robbie Lawler. Totally going to be a Hall of Famer someday. Has to be. He's already a Hall of Famer, right, for his fight with Rory McDonald. And then the Carlos Condit fight was incredible. It's like everything that you can accomplish in the UFC, he accomplished it. Long career, fought everybody, and won a championship, defended the championship, fought and won in some of the best fights ever in the UFC. Amazing finishes, just like everything you could ever want out of a UFC career. Kind of like one of those Chuck Liddell kind of fighters that was just like when you think about the UFC, you think about Robbie Lawler. So yeah, Robbie Lawler's great. Love that guy. Happy for him that he is retiring. I man, that's when you've been doing it as long as he is, I'm sure it's like I think it's pretty bittersweet for him to be retiring, but he's 41 years old. His I think he's on a kind of like a losing streak. He's had wins against Donald Cerrone and Nick Diaz, but other than that, has lost a lot more recently. So I feel like it's a perfect time for him to retire. Hopefully, he gets taken care of by the UFC, and hopefully he's made plenty of money. Hopefully, he can get a coaching role, whatever else he decides to put his hand to succeed. But yeah, wish nothing but the best for him. When a guy is like not at the top of his game anymore, I am not sad to see them leave. When Henry Cejudo announced his first retirement, I was sad for that. I felt like there was a lack of like anticlimax around that. And I was sad. I felt like he had a lot more in the tank. But with Robbie Lawler, I'm just like, dude, like literally what more is there left to do except put on a great fight with Nico Price? So I am really happy for him. Hope that he doesn't get viciously knocked out. Would love it if he could go out with one more win. So yeah, I'm glad that they're not giving him like a Jack Della Maddalena kind of fight. That would be kind of annoying. This fight should be really fun. So um, let's see. How do UFC PIs make money? Great question. They seem to be huge with lots of employees, but how do they make money if it's free for the fighters? Well, that's the thing. They don't make money. It's like an indirect way of making money. So they make money by keeping fighters healthy. Think about it this way. How much money does the UFC lose when they're going to put on a big pay-per-view and someone gets injured? When every single fight card has a string of injuries, what the UFC is doing with the UFC PI is they're hoping to cut down on injuries. It's a place where they can both try to release like new research on the best, safest training methods, but also give the fighters lots of resources to keep them healthy. So that's kind of how I see it. Is it's more of an investment into the sport to both like develop talent. Here's another way of looking at it with these international PIs. Think about how much money the Shanghai PI is going to make the UFC in time. Without the UFC Shanghai PI, China would be set back a couple years, I would say, in producing high level talent. They're still getting up there. Like there are not many fighters in the UFC who are ranked from China who have kind of like come up through the PI. Song Yadong has mostly trained at Team Alpha Male. Zhang Wei Li, not really a PI fighter. Um, who else? Yan Xiaonan has trained at the UFC PI a little bit more, but now she's at Team Alpha Male as well. But eventually, you're going to start getting some fighters that have come up through the PI. I think Dong Huaxiang, a women's strawweight, I think once she gets signed to the UFC, eventually she could be that fighter. We've got like Arichi Long and Sumu Darji, Alatung Haley. Those fighters are still kind of trying to find their footing. Shailan, more, I guess he hasn't been training at the PI as much, but yeah, eventually you're going to start to see some just like absolute killers come out of that Shanghai PI, and they're going to become huge stars. So I think eventually that will pay off. It's definitely pushed China forward into the future by a couple years in terms of their development. And long term, eventually they're going to be able to crank out a lot of really great fighters. But I wasn't really expecting that to happen in their first 5 years, to be honest. I expected it's gonna take some time for them to get their footing, kind of figure out their staff and like figure out their groove with how they're gonna train fighters, connect with fighters, work with their original gyms. So eventually, I think that's the idea of how the PI will make money, is both keeping athletes healthy and then raising up fighters in international markets. Are you familiar with UFC PI strength and conditioning coach Gav Pratt from the Shanghai PI? Yeah, I am. He's great. I really like Gavin. I've gotten to chat with him a little bit, and I think he's in the US now. I think he's at the Vegas PI. So he's not there anymore, but yeah, Gavin Pratt's great. I think he's really worked with a lot of fighters both in China but now in the US and really helped them out a lot. Let's see. Okay. Well, if you're bringing up Rose versus Carla too as an argument for separating women's MMA, then we should have separated heavyweight a long time ago, because we had fights like Francis Ngannou and Derek Lewis. Got a lot of stinkers at heavyweight, honestly, but the UFC keeps putting them on the main card. Heavyweight's been around since the very beginning, or it was the first weight class that the UFC really, or the first champion, So yeah, back to you with Gab Pratt. Rio, saw Pratt on last year's UFC Embedded training Whaley. Is that a conflict of interest for UFC employee training one of the champions? It's probably more of a strength and conditioning, because the PI they have physical therapy, but they work on strength and conditioning. But Gav Pratt he's not like a technique coach. He's a strength and conditioning coach. So the PI, they're just trying to get fighters to be as healthy as possible to bring out the best of them, and then they let the fighters' local coaching staff work on technique and game plan. So I don't think it is. Zuckerberg or Musk? Oh man, one of you guys had to ask it. Can't wait for Dana to make that fight. I'll watch that fight. When I was listening to Luke Thomas, and he was like, guys, this is not going to be any different from just walking in to the BJJ gym down the street from where you live and watching like two white belts or a white belt and a blue belt going at it. Like, and I kind of agree with that. Like, it's not going to be a pretty fight. To be honest, I would probably side with Zuck on this, just because I feel like he has a longer history of training. He's trained BJJ for like quite a while. My buddy Kai Wu, who you should definitely follow if you're not, he has almost kind of become famous for being for being Zuckerberg's main training partner, or one of his main partners. So I don't know. I want to say Zuck is maybe a BJJ blue belt, but I'm not totally sure. Don't quote me on that. But that's why I would go with Zuck, is just because I think he's had more training and looks to be looks to be in a little better shape. But otherwise, I mean, how are you going to break down Elon Musk's skill? He's a big guy, but Zuck all the way. What do you think is better for an MMA fighter, having your own team and asking for world-class coaches for help and jumping around to different places, or staying at one gym and attending the same pro classes? I think I think what I'm going to say option C. Sorry, but I'm going to say that as an MMA fighter, you are looking for coaches that you connect with. You are looking for coaches that get you and that are going to develop you as quickly as possible. And you may not find that at a big gym like ATT. It may just be like your personality. It's not a matter of like ATT not having good coaches. It may just be like your personality is, you just don't really benefit from being in the pack. You benefit from having a really, really small team. We see really good fighters come up that don't necessarily have like world renowned coaches. Zhang Wei Li, two-time UFC champion, and even though her coaches, I would say, are world class, but they weren't when she became champion at all. Her coaches were not well known at all. And so I would say your goal is to find coaches. I think you should do a little bit of both. I think you should have a season in your career where you travel around a little bit, but that's not necessarily to like replace your coaches necessarily. But I think you need to have a really good connection with your coaches, and you may have a good friendship. You may have learned a lot of good things from your coach, but you may not know what you don't have until you travel around a little bit and see like, okay, there's some other people that I may connect with even a lot better that I could really benefit from. So I would say, as a fighter, figure out what your like ideal, what you really want in a coach, and sort of your personality as a student, and then find someone who can give that to you. To build on James' question about Robbie Lawler, does Robbie Lawler stand a chance against Nico Price? Oh, absolutely. I think Robbie is incredible, and I hope that he can pull it off. Yeah, I mean, Robbie has had like somewhere around 40 pro fights. He definitely stands a chance. Nico has heavy hands. He can knock you out from a lot of positions, but he also can be a little bit defensively sound in his own right. So I think this is a pick'em fight. Honestly, I'm not leaning heavily towards Nico Price, although that I would imagine that's probably what the odds are saying, just because Nico is the younger guy, Robbie is older, lost a lot of fights recently, but yeah, that's how I kind of see that. Look up Jack Slack's breakdown of Robbie's career. I will. Thank you. What do I think of gyms that are not the PI hiring firm analysts to break down film of fighters' tendency? I heard one of the communities that not all gyms have film analysts. Let's see. Trying to decipher your question here. Gyms that are not the PI hiring film analysts to break down film. That's an interesting idea. I actually kind of like that idea. I think that's great. Almost like consultants, basically, to watch film and say like, here's what I noticed. Here, kind of to give you a report on a fighter, to be able to watch film and say, here's what I see. Here's fighter, your opponent's strengths. Here are their weaknesses. If I were you, these are some areas I think you should exploit. Create your own game plan, but here's kind of what I see as I break down film. I think it's a great idea. I feel like a lot of coaches are not going to want to do that, maybe because they feel like they could do that. But I think that really is a good idea. Maybe you can start that. Maybe that's something you can do. I could see one of these like YouTube analysts kind of getting into that. That's a great idea. Do I think that Volkanovski is one of the most skilled fighters? Yeah, I think he is one of. I think he may be the most talented fighter in MMA right now. In terms of like heart, it is like how do you find a weakness against Volkanovski unless it's size and you're Islam Makhachev, but like yeah, I don't know how you're gonna like really effectively game plan against him. I think he definitely is one of the most well-rounded guys. I think Yair, I think that he will have opportunities because he is such a dynamic fighter, but I just have a hard time seeing how he's going to beat unless I would honestly I think either Yair is going to find a way to knock out Volk with some really brilliant strike, or I think Volk's going to take a decision. Is how I'm seeing that fight. So, um, yeah. Okay, yeah. So you're saying like Fight Ready and Bong Tao have a specified guy to look and break down film. Heard that Zhang Wei Li has her own film breakdown dude, not coach, that analyzes the habits of her opponents. Especially if you're like if I'm a Chinese fighter and I am fighting in the UFC and I've got an all Chinese coaching staff, and I think that's when it's really good to hire a I think it's really good to hire someone to do like what you're saying. Someone that really knows like first of all how to find footage on opponents because that's almost a skill in and of itself is being able to find footage and just find like the dirt on your opponent. I think that's a skill in and of itself that not everyone knows how to do. And if you don't know how to navigate social media, like Western social media, I think that's one that could be really valuable. So I'm guessing that's why she hired that guy for sure. Um, but yeah, guys, that's all we got today. So thank you so much for checking out the podcast. Really appreciate all of you. I will be back next week. I'll be back. I will be back the next 2 weeks, and then I will be off the last week of July. Uh, what would that be like? July 27th, most likely. Actually, we may be able to make that work. Stay posted. But if you're not following MMA ecosystem on Threads, the biggest new thing in social media, hit me up. I joined that sucker in the first like 30 minutes of it going live. So still testing it out. I may actually throw out a video tomorrow just about Threads and kind of like the experience that is and how I'm navigating it. But yeah, hit me up on that if you haven't already. And guys, enjoy the fights. Get yourself an extra drink. Get yourself some wings. Let's enjoy these fights. Keep locked to MMA ecosystem, and we will see you next week. Enjoy.